Hi, I'm Julie McCluskey, Summit School District Director of Communications and Community Engagement. And I'm here today to talk about our fabulous middle school, as well as some of the issues that we're tackling with some of our youth here in the community. I'm also joined by Travis Avery, our Emergency Response Coordinator, and Joel Rivera, Principal at Summit Middle School. Let's talk a little bit first, Joel, just about what's going on at Summit Middle School, how things are going for our students, our staff, and community.
Right. In the past, when you talk about how well a school's doing, you talk about the state tests and achievement and that type of result. One of the things that I feel is one thing we're stepping up in is our family engagement. And so being able to talk, having parents come in, feeling comfortable coming in, parents engaged in their kids' learning, parents engaged in what's going on at the school. It's one thing that we're really proud of. We've gone from having, one or two or three volunteers on our PTO, our parent-teacher organization, to now, our meeting tomorrow, we have to move it to a classroom because we have 30 to 40 participants.
Wow.
We have a lot of, and represent all demographics, which is really awesome because that's, always a challenge in a community that has various types of demographics that are prevalent.
That's a great point. I think Summit Middle School, how many students do you have now?
So right now we're right over 750.
Great.
So we've been growing. My first year, 5-6 years ago, we started with about 575. So we've been growing steadily every year. And again, wanting to get the community involved so that brings more families in, more kids. Sure. It's just been an awesome growth and it's been fun.
Tell me a little bit about your demographics. Mm-hmm. How many, so of that 750,
right.
How many of those students are English language learners? Right. How many of those students are new to our community, right, or just moved here?
So we're sitting at roughly about 30% English language learners, in the 40s with free and reduced lunch, and not just Latino, Hispanic students. We have, Eastern European, we have West African. So we're getting a lot of different cultures that are coming to us that, really don't know or haven't had experience in the American school system. Sure. And so, part of us with that family engagement is trying to help parents navigate, tell them that we are welcome, tell them that we do want input from everybody. So in the last couple of years, is one thing that we're really proud of. And family engagement is a key factor in achievement. So we have great teachers, we have great students, we have great community. But one thing we need to do is have family engagement. It's like the third part of that, students, staff, and then also getting parents involved. So again, really proud of having our family step up and be a part of our school.
Yes, and I know last year our home visitation Conexiones program, right, was recognized locally as a great community collaboration, and we do that with the Family Intercultural and Resource Center, FERC. Right. Tell us a little bit about how the home visitation program works.
So, really it's me wanting to get out and introduce myself to community members that I really haven't had a chance to talk to. Haven't had a chance to, sit down and talk about, what do you want from your kids? Like, what do you want your kids to be when they grow up? So I typically want to meet and shake hands with all of our family members, and so home visitation became a way for me to introduce myself and have conversations with family members that I don't typically get to have conversations with. And different demographics need different resources and support. Mm-hmm. And so part of that for me is, trying to find out what that support is, what it looks like. And the home visitation, it just became the next step in that family engagement. And then from that became Conexiones, which is in my mind, a sidebar from dialogue over dinner.
Right.
So it's kind of like in conjunction with that, similar topics, different delivery depending on the need of our families. It's been a real successful program. I mean, we've had 30, 40, 50 families there. That's this year every
awesome.
Night, so it's been really amazing.
That's exciting to hear. And I don't want to belittle your success on state assessments.
Right.
We do know that we've seen some really terrific student performance at Summit Middle School. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right, so we typically perform well above the state in most of our assessments, especially math. In the last 5 years, our math, we went from, in the low 50s in terms of percentile rank in the state to the last year TCAP, we were at the 81st percentile.
Wow.
So it's a huge jump for us. Our growth scores, we're kind of in a bit of a transition, moving to PARC, so growth scores are going to be calculated a little differently.
Let me stop you there.
Okay.
PARC,
right.
which is a multi-state consortium where we have taken the Common Core or Colorado Academic Standards and aligned those with an assessment, which actually falls under what we're calling CMAS, the Colorado Measures of Academic Success. And the PARC assessment, which is a part of that, helps us understand how kids are doing in math and English language arts, right? Okay.
Correct.
So to see our kids now, while we had a new assessment this year and knew it would be different than what they've experienced in the past, they're still performing above the state.
Still performing above the state. And when you look at just the comparisons in us to similar schools, other middle schools in the state, we did just as well on PARC as we did when we were at TCAP in terms of relative comparisons. Our growth scores were the ones that we were really proud of, because in the last 4 years, for our assessments, we had the highest growth scores that we've ever had in math, reading, and writing. We had the highest achievement scores. We had the highest growth scores in terms of demographics as well. Our school performance framework, and I know this is a lot of educational jargon, but we went from an improvement school, which is like kind of you're underperforming, so we need to do some things to get to a performance school. So it kind of all happened in the last few years. I mean, academically speaking, we've been making great improvements. And
I know that there are a lot of people to thank for that. Your teachers, a great and collaborative team. I know they've been working hard to make sure that every student is getting the type of instruction that helps every individual student with individual learning needs meet their own goals. And growth in particular, when we're talking about a student in 6th grade taking a test and then a year later being tested again, we want to see a full year worth of growth. Even if the achievement score isn't maybe 90th percentile, but we can show that student is growing at least a year, if not more.
Absolutely.
That's important and a key part of how we're measuring our success.
Absolutely. And it just helps us, it guides our instruction. Where are we doing well in, what do we need to improve? Have those conversations as teachers. So, taking those, and you're right, individualizing instruction, trying to make that very relevant to that student, you're going to promote growth, because you're, again, making that relevancy to the student. They're going to naturally grow, and they're going to get better, and they're going to be more engaged. There's less discipline issues. There's a lot of implications for that. But we're real proud of our scores.
You should be. You should be proud of all of this, Joel. It's good to hear. So we do want to talk about an issue that's important at the middle school as well as the high school. And when we talk about student safety and security, there is nothing more important. And Travis, one of the things we've seen in the news recently that certainly concerns our community, our parents, our staff, our students, is both cyberbullying and sexting. Can you talk a little bit about what those terms mean and what it is that we're seeing in the state?
Sure. Sexting in particular is something that's defined by the electronic transmission of graphic sexual images, whether it's images of, more commonly images of body parts, and then sometimes acts of things. Originally, the legislation and laws around that were to target predators to prevent them from transmitting and sending these images between adults, essentially. And what with the, I don't know if onslaught is quite the right term, but the massive use of technology by young adults and teenagers and even younger students with the advent of smartphones and things like that, is the law has begun to cover if students and young people choose to transmit those images amongst themselves. And so the challenge becomes the enforcement of the law around kids passing images amongst themselves.
And so sexting really involves maybe nude pictures, students sharing explicit acts or photos via text messages, right? Or email. So what is cyberbullying? What's the difference?
So cyberbullying has more to do with how behaviors and interaction between students. Bullying is really about imbalances in power between two individual students or groups of students against an individual student or things like that. And so the cyberbullying is just an extension of that online, where an individual student has some amount of power or chooses to exert some perceived difference against another student, or a group of students do it to pick on a student. But it's about, not having even social status or cultural status or many different means that it can take place, but this perception of imbalance of power and how they apply that to this student who has less power somehow.
Okay,
socially,
so sexting could be cyberbullying, right? If somebody were to take a photo of another student and share it with others to try and ridicule or intimidate that other student.
It certainly could be a means of it. I think the one main difference with sexting is there's more legal law-breaking issues around sexting specifically than there's necessarily about cyberbullying. What it would take to prosecute somebody legally around bullying has a much different standard than what it takes to if you're going to follow a legal prosecution path with sexting.
So, and that is a great segue into, I know in Canyon City, Colorado this year, there were stories of high school students and I believe middle school students that were sexting or sharing photos. What can you say to just that event and what we all learned from it?
I think that there's a couple of points that are important. I think one, it's certainly going on in any community or school community and wider community, because we both play a part. Who were to assume that it's not happening in their community, I think would be under a very false assumption. Canyon City is not that different of an environment from Summit County. I think the other main thing that comes up in these cases is that the understanding of the parents' generation around technology and use of technology and things like apps and various tools that are available on the phone that kids are using, have access to, have much greater familiarity and knowledge with, creates a challenge in terms of having an understanding of what's going on.
Right.
And that plays into the age-old conversation with teenagers and their parents about privacy and how much they're sharing and what the parent wants to know, and that has gone on.
Right, before a cell phone was ever invented, right?
So, but it just gives that technology just adds to that dialogue, and I think the key point is it so often comes back to is how are your parents engaging with their children? So,
just for those parents watching, what are some basic recommendations you would make around issues around cyberbullying or sexting?
I think there's a lot to do with being familiar with technology yourself, engaging your kid in a conversation about responsible use of technology, and I know the schools work on that as well and provide resources and put that information certainly in students' hands and pass that along to parents, what we're doing, but making sure that you're having a dialogue about what's appropriate out in the cyber landscape and what's inappropriate, and then I think depending on the age, depending on the responsibility level of your child, how much access a parent has to their children's devices it's a valid thing, and you may upset your child may not like it, but at the same, it comes back to that being a parent sometimes. And
yes, sometimes that's a tough job.
It is.
It is a tough job. When we return, we're going to talk more about cyberbullying and sexting and what Summit Middle School will be doing with students in a very creative way to help students better understand the dangers, the risks, and ways they can protect themselves around these issues.